to iron out their differences. While the pact is awaiting ratification in the European Parliament and the Council, a lively debate emerged, with some calling it in fact a rational compromise and others finding it disingenuous. The pact aims for a strong external dimension, a robust management of borders, and a permanent solidarity system with new tools such as return sponsorships, with important implications on EU integration and burden sharing in the area of asylum and migration, as well as potential cooperation with third parties. At this point, I believe a communication of this pact with Turkey and a dialogue between EU and Turkey and European Union and Turkish stakeholders, European and Turkish stakeholders, is important, as Turkey is the country currently hosting highest number of refugees. It is both a transit and a source country, and also because it is currently engaged with cooperation with the EU through several channels as part of a customs union, as a candidate country for EU membership, and is already part of a formal cooperation with the EU since 2016 on the management of refugees. So at this point, we thought it is important to inform policymakers on both sides and promote a lively dialogue and feedback mechanisms while the pact is being shaped. So today we have very select expert speakers, hence this high participation. But before this, I'd like to give the floor briefly to the two institutions that made this webinar possible, who bought my idea and generously offered their help and assistance. So I'd like to give the floor for quick opening remarks to Haluk Nuray from TOP-İKV and Laura Batalla. I realize that I have forgotten to introduce myself. My name is Başak Yavçan. I'm a professor of political science at TOP University of Economics and Technology. Also, I am a researcher at University of Liège in Belgium. Haluk Bey, the floor is yours. Haluk Bey, mikrofonunuzu açmanızı rica edeceğim. Ben açabilirim. Açamadım.
Evet, açtım herhalde şu anda. Evet, dışarıdan hem mute edilmiş. Kusura bakmayın. Toplantıyı düzenleyenlere ve çok değerli zamanlarını bizim için ayıran çok kıymetli uzman konuşmacılarımıza TOBB ve tüm katılan dinleyenler adına en derin teşekkürlerimi sunarak başlamak istiyorum. Bu vesileyle sizlere TOBB Başkanı Sayın Rıfat Hisarcıklıoğlu'nun selam, sevgi ve başarı dileklerini de iletmek istiyorum. Onun ifadesiyle söyleyeyim size, bu konuda bundan daha güçlü bir panel düşünülemezdi dedi bunu görünce. Bilmeyenler için de kısaca açıklayayım. TOBB kısaltmasıyla söyleyeyim. Türkiye Odalar ve Borsalar Birliği 1,5 milyonu aşan üyesi ve 367 yerel üye odası ile Türk iş dünyasının ekonominin temel birimi olan firmaya en yakın ve en güçlü temsil kurumudur. Ve üyelerimiz az sonra detaylarıyla tartışılacak olan göç ve iltica konusunun ekonomik ve sosyal etkilerini ta iliklerine kadar hissetmektedir. Sorunlarını birebir yaşamaktadır. Bu toplantıyı ev sahipliği yapmamızın ve Başak Hanım'ın söylediği gibi ilgiyle, hevesle desteklememizin sebebi de budur zaten. Çünkü iş dünyası gerçekten etkilenmektedir. Şimdi size bir tek örnek vereyim. Sürem çok kısıtlı. Bu zannediyorum hem konunun Türkiye açısından neden bu kadar önemli olduğunu hem de Türkiye'nin tutumunu yansıtacak bir örnek olacak. Başka ülkelerde hiç olmayan bir durum var bizde. Misafir ettiği göçmen sayısı nüfusundan fazla olan şehirlerimiz var. Ve bu şehirlerde yerli halkla göçmenler arasında tek bir tatsız olay dahi yaşanmamış durumda. Dünyanın birçok yerinden görülmemiş bir durum bu. Tabii ben bir sosyal bilimler uzmanı değilim. Çok değerli uzmanlarımız biraz sonra o açıdan ele alacaklar. Konunun teknik, siyasi, bürokratik, akademik bütün yönlerini inceleyecekler bizim için. Ben göç olgusundan dolaylı olarak etkilenen iyi gözlemci, sıradan bir vatandaşın bakış açısını yansıtmaya çalışacağım burada. Tabii bir simülasyon dünyasında yaşanmıyoruz. Haberler bitip televizyonları kapatınca sorunlar bitmiyor. Bir kısım insanlar öyle zannetse de. Sorunlar büyümeye devam ediyor. Tabii bizi de düşündürmeye, endişelendirmeye devam ediyor. İşte ben bu şekilde etkilenen, dolaylı etkilenen bir vatandaşın olarak bazı gözlemlerimi, düşüncelerimi sizlerle 6 madde halinde paylaşacağım. Birincisi şu, göç sorunu son zamanlarda çok daha acil bir sorunun yarattığı sis perdesi altında kaldı ve gündemin gerilerine düştü. Bu bizi yanıltmamalı. Covid salgını gidecek, bitecek ama göç sorunu bitmeyecek. Bitmek bir yana artarak devam edecek. Çünkü istatistiklere bakınca görüyoruz. Şu anda göçün kaynağı olan bölgeler bundan 50 yıl sonra bizim yer küremizin nüfusu hala artmakta olan yegane bölgeleri olacaklar. Oradan gelen demografik baskı sona ermeyecek. Buralardaki çatışmalar ve ekonomik sorunlar da sona ermeyecek. Göreceli olarak fakirlikleri devam edecek ve nihayet çok farklı bir psikolojik durum var. Belki sayın uzmanlarımız benden çok daha iyi biliyorlar. Dünyanın her yerinde yapılan araştırmalar özellikle gençler arasında doğduğu yerden başka bir yerde yaşama ve oraya seyahat etme arzusunun tarihte görülmemiş ölçüde yüksek olduğunu söylüyorlar. Bunların etkisiyle göç sorununun devam edeceğini düşünüyorum ben. İkinci söylemek istediğim şu. Şimdi ben en başta göç sorununu yerel bir örnek üzerinden, bir şehir üzerinden anlatmaya çalıştım ama göç sorunu yerel bir sorun değil maalesef. Göç sorunu aynı iklim sorunu, eşitsizlikler sorunu, Covid sorunu gibi küresel bir sorun. Dolayısıyla tüm küresel sorunlar gibi küresel çözümler bekliyor ve diğer küresel sorunlar gibi yer küremizin bazı bölgelerini, bazı ülkelerini diğerlerinden daha fazla etkiliyor. Herkese eşit şekilde, her kesime eşit şekilde etkilemiyor. Bu fazla etkilenen bölgeleri söyleyeyim şimdi. Mesela AB gibi göç akımlarının birincil hedefi, gelmek isteyenlerin birincil hedef ülkesi olan bölgeler tabii kötü etkileniyorlar bundan. Ama onlardan daha fazla etkilenen bir kategori daha var. O da göçün hem hedefi hem de transit geçiş yolu olan bizim gibi ülkeler. Yani Türkiye. Türkiye AB'nin etkilendiğinden çok daha ağır bir şekilde etkileniyor göç konusunda. Üçüncü söylemek istediğim şey şu: geçtiğimiz 10 yılda Orta Doğu'daki çatışmalardan kaynaklanan bu son göç dalgasının en büyük yükü Avrupa Birliği'nin ve Türkiye'nin üzerindedir. Ve ben şöyle düşünüyorum. Yük bizim üzerimizde olduğuna göre çözümü de bizim bulmamız gerekir. Ya da şöyle ifade edeyim. Bizim anlaşmaktan, işbirliği yapmaktan başka çaremiz yoktur Türkiye ile AB'nin. Ve geleyim toplantının konusu olan bu AB'nin yeni yasasına. Şunu söylemek istiyorum. Ne kadar mükemmel olursa olsun göç sorununu bir ulusal mevzuat çıkararak sonlandırmak mümkün değil. Sona erdirmek mümkün değil. Şöyle diyeyim, göçün kaynağı olan ülkelerin ve yol üzerindeki bütün ülkelerin kendi ulusal mevzuatlarını çıkardığını düşünün. Mükemmel dedim ama yani 43 senedir bürokrasinin içindeyim. Mükemmel mevzuat diye de bir şey yok üstelik. Böyle her biri birer ulusal mevzuat çıkararak bu sorunu çözemeyeceğimiz çok açık. Çünkü 5. noktaya geldim bu arada. Göç sizin çok daha iyi bildiğiniz gibi çok boyutlu bir konu. İç boyutu var, dış boyutu, ekonomi, asayiş, güvenlik ve tabii ki insani boyutlar var. Tüm bu boyutların bir arada değerlendirmesi lazım. AB'nin yeni çıkardığı mevzuata ben şöyle kabaca kendi bildiğim kadarıyla bir göz attım. Tüm bu boyutların farkında olunduğu belli AB tarafından. Bu tek boyutlu bir mevzuat değil. Ama daha çok işin iç boyutuyla ilgili bir mevzuat. Yani içeride bir bütünlük sağlamakla ilgili bir mevzuat. Bunu eleştiri olarak söylemiyorum. Çünkü göçün AB'nin bir ortak politikası olması doğru yolda atılmış çok olumlu bir adım. Çözüme giden eğer küresel bir yol varsa, küresel bir çözüm bulunacaksa bunun ilk taşlarını bu tür mevzuatlarla çözmüş olabilirsiniz. Çünkü 27 ülke bir araya geliyor. Türkiye'de katılırsa çok ciddi bir birliktelik olacak ama yolumuz çok daha uzun. Onu da söyleyeyim. Ve son cümlelerimi de şöyle söyleyeyim. Aynı zamanda panelin adının alt başlığında bir soru var. Bu soruya da cevabım aynı zamanda bu. Türkiye ve AB birlikte hareket ederek, birlikte çalışarak, dikkat edin çalışarak, çatışarak değil, hep çatışıyoruz çünkü, küresel çözümün tohumlarını atabilirler. Beklenen küresel çözümü atmalıdırlar. Eğer bunu birisi yapacaksa bu biziz. Bu da son sözlerimdi. Sizlere verimli ve güzel bir toplantı dileğimi yineleyerek sözü Laura'ya bırakmak istiyorum. O da açılış konuşmasını yapacak zannediyorum. Ve size veda ediyorum.
Thank you very much, Haluk Bey. It's our pleasure actually to organize this timely webinar together. I would just like to say a very few words about the EU-Turkey Forum, especially for our Turkey audience who might not know about us. The EU-Turkey Forum was founded in March 2010 by members from the biggest political groups in the European Parliament. And since then, it has been successfully relaunched every parliamentary term. The aim of our forum is to advance a well-informed debate on issues related to EU and Turkey relations, while also serving as a bridge between Turkey and the EU. In the past 10 years, the group has successfully positioned itself at the core of EU-Turkey relations, having hosted a large number of high-level meetings between European and Turkish officials, decision-making experts, civil society, and business actors. The current chair of the forum is Mr. Peters, and MEPs Kati Piri, Urmas Paet, and Tineke Strik, who we have the pleasure to have among us today, are the vice chairs. Particularly at times like this, we hope to give a new impetus to EU-Turkey relations by rebuilding trust and cooperation at all levels. In our 10 years of experience, our forum has become an influential, credible, and respected interlocutor between Turkey and the EU. Our unique voice stems from our cross-party and non-partisan nature, and as well as our willingness to engage and listen to all stakeholders. This is what we are trying to achieve today. As Haluk Bey was saying, we also want to hear from Turkey regarding the cooperation that the EU has in the field of migration. While this cooperation has proved to be a resilient one with its shortcomings, of course, migration continues to be a very divisive issue in the European Union. I will let our experts talk more in detail about the new Pact on Migration and Asylum, which aims to address the flaws that EU migration policy has had in the last years, promising a new start. And this is what we want to explore today, whether this is really a new start for migration at the EU level and how it will impact the cooperation that we have with Turkey on this issue. So on behalf of the forum, I would like to also extend my gratitude to all the speakers for having accepted our invitation, and also to TOBB for hosting this important event.
Thank you very much, Ms. Batalla, Mr. Nuray, not only for these great opening remarks, but also your support throughout the organization of this event, and also your team. I'd like to emphasize this. I'd like to thank everyone who got involved in the organization of this webinar in TOBB Brussels, TOBB Ankara, and also EU-Turkey Forum, and also the support staff of our speakers, our translators from the beginning. And then I'd like to, as we move to the panel, I'd like to remind everyone that for translation, you can click on the interpretation button at the bottom of the Zoom window, and you can ask your questions throughout the panel. You can put them in the chat box, and we'll do our best to get to them. We prefer, it would be great if you could post them in English, but if you prefer to post them in Turkish, we'll be happy to address them as well. And our speakers generously offer to do their best to answer all of the questions. So hopefully, even if we cannot get to them during the panel, we'll make sure that they'll address them. They offer to address them after the panel. So without further ado, let me move to our speakers. Today we have a very special group of experts, and who who are carrying actually multiple hats. If there's one thing that we can say about them, that would be their multiple roles. They are all academics. They all teach. They're all policymakers. They're all involved in informing policy, advising policy, and they are all very strongly linked to what is going on in the field, with strong connections to NGOs doing field work in the field. So we are very happy and excited to have them. I'd like to start this conversation with giving the floor to first Mr. Knaus. After a quick introduction, he is the founding chairman of the European Stability Initiative, and he has studied at Oxford, Brussels, and Bologna, and taught economics in Ukraine, and spent 10 years working for NGO and international organizations in Bosnia and Kosovo. There is a lot to tell about him, but we know him from his important contributions to the EU response to refugee flows following the 2015 events leading up to the EU refugee deal. So today I'd like to ask Mr. Knaus about the process that led to the pact, the EU Refugee Pact, and what is proposed with this pact, and what is new in terms of the three pillars that we have I have briefly touched upon in the beginning. So the floor is yours, Mr. Knaus. Thank you.
Well, thanks a lot. I want to thank TOP and the EU-Turkey Forum for this opportunity. It is a very timely debate. The stakes could not be higher. Not just because EU-Turkey relations today are at a probably most tense moment than at any time since 1999, since Turkey became a candidate for accession, perhaps as tense as they were in the mid-90s. I just picked up preparing that the French government is allegedly thinking about suspending the customs union, which is of course an escalation of the debate, which was concluded in '96. It's not just because EU-Turkey relations are in this tense moment, and we need to all think, how can one make proposals to get back to win-win solutions for Turkey and the EU? It's also because in the field of refugees, the situation could not be more dramatic. What we have today, despite COVID, very low numbers of irregular arrivals across the Mediterranean this year. But what we have at the Mediterranean border of the EU is a situation of complete lawlessness. EU law does not apply. We are seeing pushbacks regularly across the sea, but also at land borders like the Croatian-Bosnian border. We are seeing reception conditions for people who have arrived, who have reached the EU. About 4,000 children under the age of 12 are being held in abysmal conditions on European Greek islands at this moment. Most of them, or many of them, a year or longer. Winter is coming, there's no preparation. And what we see, if we take this together, is a response, and then I'll get to your question, a response to a question already there in 2015, 2016, which is, how can the EU reduce irregular arrivals across the sea? And the response that is being given today at the Hungarian, at the Croatian, at the Greek border is through deterrence. Deterrence meaning we treat people in such a way that they prefer to stay in Turkey. Now, this is clearly illegal. We have the European Convention on Human Rights, we have human dignity, we have a European Charter of Fundamental Rights, which says that human dignity needs to be respected. But it is increasingly the preferred response of more and more governments in Europe. Now, in 2016, in January and February 2016, we had a very different situation when it comes to the numbers, but we had the same question. At that time, in January and February, in winter, more than 120,000 people crossed in boats from Turkey to Greece in 2 months, 120,000. To put it in context, this year, in 10 months, until the end of October, it's been 14,000 that crossed from Turkey to Greece. So 120,000 people crossing in 2 months. And the question in Europe was also then, how can we control and reduce this number? But at that time, the idea was that this should be done in line with existing EU law. Existing EU and international law says that anybody who reaches Europe, or indeed who reaches Turkey or any country that is signatory to the Refugee Convention, cannot be pushed back without a procedure, without checking whether they need protection. So you cannot, and this actually was the central question then, you cannot just push people back by their boats, by force, and you should not, and it's illegal to treat them so badly that they prefer not to come. You have to receive people, you have to have a procedure, but what you can do under international and EU law is return those who are safe in another country. And so what happened in March 2016, there were two concepts in the EU. One was the concept of what we see today, which is let's just deter by trapping people somewhere unpleasant. At that time, some in the EU said, let's keep everyone from leaving Greece. So the idea was you send soldiers to the Greek border with North Macedonia, you keep people leaving Greece, and you hope that then the situation in Greece for those people will be so bad that they will stop coming. And there were people at that time, heads of government, Prime Minister of Hungary and others, saying we should embrace the Australian solution, which means treating people so that they don't come. And then there was the other alternative, and it was put on the table by Turkey. We must not forget, in the first week of March 2016, it was the Turkish Prime Minister who suggested to the European Union something that really, for 4 years, became the only successful measure the EU really took to control irregular migration without breaking the laws, which was, he said, listen, Turkey is prepared to take back people from the islands after a cutoff date. So after the 20th of March, Turkey is prepared to take back people, but only those that you decide you can return. And this is how it is written in the agreement. Everybody who arrives at the islands has the right to apply for asylum. This has to be checked. It is explicit in the agreement that there can be no mass return, mass pushbacks. There has to be a procedure. But if the procedure finds that a Syrian family is safe in Turkey and can be returned, or that a Pakistani or Afghan is not a refugee and can be returned, Turkey is ready to take them back. Now, why did the country with most refugees in the world, Turkey, offer to take refugees from the European Union? Because the Turkish leadership made a right calculation. It knew and it expected, but it didn't know, it expected, but it turned out it was right. If it made this offer, the number of people crossing would fall fast. It would not need to take back many people. And in return, it demanded a range of concrete support for the huge number of refugees, which were already in Turkey and which we, of course, know are still in Turkey in even larger numbers. This actually saved the European Union, because at that time already there was a majority of member states that wanted the other method. This is what Viktor Orban has been praising in early 2016. The other method was treat refugees badly and they don't come. Since March 2020, or since late February 2020, this EU-Turkey statement is no longer used. It's not a legal document, it's just a statement of intent, but Turkey is no longer taking anybody back from the Greek islands. Now, the last return was, I think, on the 5th of March. Now, in return, Greece, with the full support of the institutions of the European Union, at its land border and at its sea border, is now resorting to pushbacks. I mean, the New York Times identified more than 1,000. German NGOs have found more. We don't really need to dig very deep. There is no shortage of evidence. The trouble is, it's working. The number of people crossing to the Greek islands has never been as low as now. We've had, in the last few months, a few hundred people crossing each month. And the number of people crossing the land border is even lower. There too, of course, the methods used by the European Union, by member states, has been to push people back without a procedure. Now, the choice then, and let me conclude here with the introduction, the choice then is for Europe and Turkey, whether what we have today, which is no agreement anymore on how to control irregular migration in line with the Refugee Convention on Human Rights, pushbacks on the EU side, which mean that actually few people reach Europe, which mean that this policy is increasingly popular. For example, in Greece, there isn't much opposition to it in parliament from anyone, which erodes legality at the EU's border. This is illegal. This is not legal. But we've seen courts in Europe, including the Human Rights Court in Strasbourg, beginning to move, in the case of a Spanish judgment a few months ago, to say, well, under certain conditions, pushbacks might be okay. We know American and Australian courts have ruled in favor of pushbacks in the past. So what I fear, and we want to be realistic here, is that if there isn't a new agreement between the EU and Turkey, the EU will not stop doing what it is doing now, which is deterrence by illegality at its borders. We've seen for years how this is being done at the Croatian border, and there's been no change. And we've seen images of people beaten with, real injuries on their bodies, staggering into Bosnian hospitals in recent months. There's been no serious effort to stop this. So the choice for Turkey and the EU is there a better way? And the irony might be that at a moment when Turkey and the EU and their relationship is in crisis on almost every area, this is an area where Greece, Turkey, and some in the EU have a common interest. And I would urge those in Turkey who have influence on the debate to actually think strategically and put on the table another proposal, just as the Turkish government did in March 2016, a proposal that is in Turkey's interest, because it will include further support by the European Union for the next 6 years, substantial financial support for the 3.5 million refugees in Turkey. That would include a new cutoff date where Turkey would say, we are again prepared to take people back, not those now on the islands, these 20,000 poor souls who've been there for a year. We make a new cutoff date from which we are prepared to take people back. You are again responsible for figuring out the procedures to decide. And we want the part of the agreement we reached in 2016 on resettlement, on taking people from Turkey in an orderly way to Europe, which is point 4 of the agreement, the voluntary humanitarian resettlement. We want this to start. If Turkey puts such a proposal on the table, then you'll have a real debate in the EU. But the irony will be, this is the moment to do it. Greece, Germany as the presidency and others want another agreement with Turkey. There are some in the EU who don't, who are happy not to pay any money for refugees in third countries, who are happy with deterrence. But this is a lose-lose for refugees, for Europe, for Greece, for legality, and for Turkey. So I would think, and we've written a proposal how such a slightly modified statement could look. I would think the key for Turkey is to put that on the table. The migration pact the EU has produced, which I'm sure we'll talk about more, will not make any difference to any of this. If it's passed or if it's not passed, will not change what happens in the Aegean. And I'm sure we'll go into details on this as well. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for putting the spotlight on Turkey so much early in the panel already, and providing us a holistic evaluation of the pact, of the Turkey-EU deal, leading us into the pact. And now I'm sure Tineke will have a lot more to say about this, as she has been reflecting her views at several panels that I've been following up until now, and I'm really looking forward to hear from her as to what is new with this pact, and the pros and cons, potential issues in regards to asylum processes, burden sharing, and of course with the third country cooperation. But let me say a few things about Tineke to introduce her. She is Tineke Strik. Ms. Strik is a member of the European Parliament for the Dutch Greens since 2019, and she's also a professor of citizenship and migration law from 2017 to 2019. She was member of the Senate for Dutch Greens. During that period, she represented the Dutch Parliament in the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, and she is her focus now on the European Parliament is on migration and asylum policies, specifically their compliance with human rights. In particular, she's in the Parliament. She's a member of several committees related to migration, and for instance, the Libya Committee, and she's the coordinator for the Greens EFA group and the rapporteur on the Recast Returns Directive. We're looking forward to hear from you, Ms. Strick. Thank you. I believe your camera is off for some reason, though. Maybe Tineke dropped, or because she's on mute too, just when we need her. Maybe we'll give her a couple seconds to get back. If not, we'll move to Ayhan. Okay, I think we'll hear all the positives and negatives of, oh yeah, there she is, perfect. Okay, welcome back. We got worried for a minute there, Tineke. Thank you, welcome back.
Yeah, thank you. I heard you all the time, so I did not miss anything, but all of a sudden I lost also you on the screen. So thank you also very much for inviting me to this interesting panel. And as Gerard already said, I think it's very timely, although the new pact is really indeed, as already was explained, focusing on the internal legislation of the EU. I think it has so many relationships with Turkey that it's very worthwhile to analyze it. And let me start by saying, indeed, it's true that at the moment the relations between Turkey and the EU is very tense, and we need each other very much, I think. But let me also emphasize the tension is between the regime and the political leaders and not with the countries themselves. I think there's a very broad awareness that we need to cooperate together. If you look at the new pact, for me, a very important criteria to see if it's really going to mean a fresh start is the Moria situation, actually, the situation on the Greek island. Will the new pact really lead to an improvement of the situation, to the situation that we finally can bring this scandalous situation on the Greek islands to an end? And I think it's very clear that two important elements that have created the Greek situation is, on the one hand, the EU-Turkey deal, of course, that makes people stick on the Greek islands until they can be returned on the one hand, and on the other hand, the criterion that the first state of entrance in the EU becomes and remains responsible for the asylum procedure. And I think this Dublin criterion, so to say, is an obstacle for years already in order to get a real harmonization of our asylum policies, and to bring an end to secondary movements, so that asylum seekers try to go to other countries because they are stuck in the border countries where there is not sufficient access to asylum, not sufficient reception conditions, no perspective, even if they get a refugee status. So I think this unequal responsibility sharing is the main obstacle. Now, if you look at the new pact, I must say the expectations were very high, but the disappointment is just as high, because you see that the solidarity system is not mandatory at all. It gives a lot of discretion for other member states to decide if they're going to share responsibility, and if so, in what way. They can choose between giving money, between supporting the returns of people, or by relocate people. And if they relocate people, they will not relocate people from those hotspots at the borders, but from the mainland or people who already got a refugee status. So it will not lead to a relief of the responsibility and the burden of the border countries. And I think that's in itself already a very important thing to note, and to not to expect too much of this new pact, that it will fundamentally change. So the first entry criterion remains in this new pact. At the same time, the border countries are obliged to organize a border procedure. So to organize a very accelerated procedure by filtering the people who get protection and who not. And for the ones who are rejected in the border procedure, they have to stay at the border and be returned. But all this procedure will rely still on the capacity of the national immigration authorities, of the capacity, if there's sufficient capacity of lawyers, of judges. It will not be an EU organized border procedure. So I'm very skeptical. If you look at the capacity currently of the border countries, think of Greece, think of Italy, but also other border countries, this is already the problem at the moment. And then if I then specifically look at the Greek situation, there is an obligation for using the border procedure for certain categories, but at the same time, border countries may use the border procedure for more types of asylum claims. For instance, if people come from a safe third country. Now, if you look at who are on the Greek islands, these are people who have departed from Turkey, and Turkey is by the Greek authorities in many cases regarded as a safe third country. This means that practically everyone who arrives at the territory of the EU in Greece will have to go through this border procedure. If you already look now, if you register yourself and you ask for asylum, you get an appointment for 1 year later, and you have to wait all the time at the Greek islands. And you know how deplorable the situation over there is. Moria has been burned down, but the new camp, Karatepe, is just as bad. And we are, again, just before entering into the winter, and people are staying there in summer tents, at the sea, no mattresses, no showers. And so it really, the crisis will even deteriorate this winter, I'm afraid. And the new pact doesn't offer solutions for this in anyhow. I think we really should have to have a mandatory solidarity system so that people could be taken away from the border instead of actually emphasizing the responsibility of the border countries. Because, of course, this is not fair for the border countries, but it also leads to violation of the rules that we have if it comes to reception, to the access to an asylum procedure, and to a lot of procedural safeguards. And indeed, Gerald talked a lot already about the pushbacks. I think this is also related to this. You see it on the many external borders happening. We have asked the Fundamental Rights Agency to come up with an investigation. They will release a report this month, but we know it's structural, and it's really accompanied with flagrant violation of the right to asylum, but also the prohibition of torture. And I think if we do not depart from this first entry criterion, it's very difficult to really combat this pushbacks and violation of the right to asylum. And maybe we will talk about. One other thing. There's also the proposal of a screening regulation, so that there's a screening prior to the border procedure to see who is eligible for a border procedure and who not. The positive thing is that minors below the age of 14 will not go to the border procedure, so they will be forwarded to a normal procedure on the mainland, so that's positive. But Johansson also said the Commission, this screening procedure and especially the monitoring system that we will put in place will prevent further pushbacks. But if you look at this monitor mechanism, we see that it only is limited to monitoring the screening procedure as such. So only if this procedure in this formal border crossing point is complying with the rules. But if you look where do the pushback takes place, they do not take place at official border crossing points. They take place in the forest, at sea, you name it. So the monitor mechanism should be much widened, much more independent, and also have a European link. So we should not leave it to the national monitoring bodies, but also establish a kind of European body that can also have a quick relation to the Commission, because in the end, it's the Commission that needs to enforce compliance and take measures if member states violate the rules. We will come back later on the external dimension, but I can already say perhaps that there's not so much attention for the external dimension. It was already said. A lot of language that is used in the pact is old language, so to say. There's a lot of talk already about equal partnerships, about win-win-win situations or whatever. But if you think, okay, what would we need to have in that in order to create a better relationship with third countries, I would say we really are in need of more commitments on resettlement, for instance, more binding criteria for the member states to invite and bring in refugees in a legal way. Because at the moment, the external dimension is very much focusing on preventing irregular migration, but that means that we shift the responsibility to third countries. And if you only think about the Global Compact on the refugees that so many countries supported 2 years ago, also the EU countries saying we need to take our responsibility as well. I don't see it back in the solidarity system in the EU, and I also don't see it back in our relations with the third countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Tineke, for these great points on the accelerated asylum processes, the need for independent monitoring, and also touching on the unaccompanied minors. I see you mentioning this as one pro of the one silver lining of the pact. I heard it elsewhere as well, and I have a lot of questions on these things, and I can't wait for us to move to the Q&A session. Now I'll turn to Ayhan Kaya, Professor Kaya, and ask him about this pact and evaluated this pact in relation to the historical EU approach to migration management, both policy-wise and academically, and looking at things also a bit from the Turkish perspective. But let me briefly introduce Professor Kaya, who is a professor of politics and Jean Monnet Chair of European Politics of Interculturalism at the Department of International Relations at Istanbul Bilgi University. He's also the director of the Jean Monnet Center of Excellence, where we get to collaborate a lot with him through this center as well. He's currently a European Research Council Advanced Grant holder, also a sister project of Magic, namely Respond. And he is, we know him through his works way before Syrian refugee crisis, as he has been working on migration for a very long time. He has focused on European identities and, of course, the Euro-Turks in Germany, France, Belgium, and Netherlands. So he continues his work on refugee studies in Turkey, conventional and non-conventional forms of political participation, the rise of populist movements, and also radicalization. The floor is yours, Ayhan Hocam.
Başak, thank you very much. I also want to thank TOP and Turkey EU Forum for organizing such a timely intervention when different member states are also discussing about the viability of the new pact. What I want to do is to say a few words about the positive and negative aspects of this pact. Probably along the same line with the previous speakers, I also see some positive sides of the new Pact on Migration and Asylum. First of all, there is a lot of emphasis on solidarity, which sounds good. We don't know, of course, if it is going to be implemented as such in practice, but there is a lot of word about solidarity. There is also a lot of emphasis on resilience. We also know that there are people who are happy with the term resilience, but there are also people who are not really happy with the term resilience. Probably I'm one of them. I see it as a very neoliberal term, giving too much burden and responsibility on the individual, and state is in a way whitewashing itself in this whole spectrum of problems at the moment. And the third positive aspect is the emphasis on responsibility sharing, be it a flexible way or a rigid way, but there is a wording of responsibility sharing very explicitly. And overall, this pact can be perceived as a positive step in terms of achieving a common migration and asylum policy within the European Union. But on the other hand, when we look at the negative sides of the pact, referring to the past experiences within the European policymaking processes, referring to the past events dating back to the war in the Balkans back in the 1990s, and also, of course, 9/11. One of the first things that I see very clearly is that there is a very explicit continuation of the discourse of securitization in this text. We see this discursively when there are too many words about the reinforcement of Frontex, which implicitly underline or legitimize the pushback. So we see that this pact is still being constructed in the political climate which dates back to the 9/11, September 11 terrorist events. The second thing that I see here in this text, in terms of its discourse, is there is a clear path towards the externalization of migration and asylum management policies, and this is visible in its embrace of bilateral agreements between the EU on the one hand and Turkey and Libya and some other countries. So that means that the pact endorses, the pact embraces such a path in the near future as well. The third point, which is again very visible in the text, is the renationalization of migration and asylum policies at the EU level. This is, in a way, I see the whole pact is a kind of attempt to curb the right-wing populist resurgence within the European Union member states. And we see this clearly when there is a lot of concessions made to different states such as Hungary, Slovakia, or Poland, or even some others. And here, I think that there is a kind of resemblance that we see here in terms of the policy making back in the mid-2000s, especially after Merkel administration came to power, with Sarkozy becoming very critical on multiculturalism, Cameron becoming very critical on multiculturalism, etc. So I see that there is a continuation of this trend, putting blame on refugees, on migration. So there is this continuity of the EU in a way making concessions to the member states in terms of renationalizing the migration and asylum policies rather than Europeanizing those policies. The third aspect that I see here is the increasing emphasis on return rather than integration of migrants or integration of refugees. So then this is also understandable for the Turkish political elite to constantly put emphasis on the return rhetoric rather than integration rhetoric at the moment in the Turkish context. So then this in terms of the emphasis, putting emphasis on return, I think two sides are reinforcing their rhetoric of return, underlining efficient and coordinated return. So instead of integration, there is too much wording on return. And finally, as Gerald also underlined, there is a very clear depiction of the politics of deterrence. And this deterrence is actually seriously against the very European law, which is based on the protection and the protection of human dignity. And this will continue to create hundreds of people, thousands of people who are stuck in reception, waiting for the moment to get integrated into the social, economic, and political spheres of life in the EU member states. So this shows us that in 2015, when there was a strong welcoming culture, this welcoming culture is unfortunately now being replaced with a rather hostile culture based on a politics of deterrence. So overall, when I look at this whole picture, I see that there are really interesting similarities in terms of the Turkish state's response, current response to the refugees, etc., as well as the European Union's response to the ongoing issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Kaya, for this comparative perspective and to help us see the parallels and kind of guide us into the zeitgeist, if you may. I'd like to, having set the context that led to this pact and evaluated the pros and cons in general in the first round. First, I'd like to thank our speakers once again for your inputs and interventions. And now we can focus on the external dimension a bit more, I believe. But let me remind all of our participants again that they can post questions in the Q&A button or from the chat box. We will be filtering their questions. They can just post them there. And please remember to introduce yourself and also please make sure you mention who the question is for, who the question is addressed at. Let me, I am also awaiting a lot of questions on the issues that we talked about in the first part in relation to the feasibility of asylum processes or the burden sharing, the return assistance, the sponsored returns, and maybe independent monitoring as well. But going back to the external dimension, I would like to change the order of our speakers a bit more this time and turn to Ms. Strick for give us a general picture of EU's cooperation with third countries so far with North African countries like Libya as well as Turkey, and point out the potential issues and areas of improvement in the pact. You have touched upon this briefly, that it doesn't seem to have much of a potential, but maybe we can talk about the areas that could be addressed and that could be improved in the due course.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, of course, this external dimension is developing for decades already now, but that you see a clear trend in, on the one hand, that in the beginning it was more bilateral formal readmission agreements being concluded, but then the member states noticed that they need to have more leverage in order to negotiate better with third countries, and then they shifted the competence more to the EU. But then still, I think it was very difficult for the Commission to really negotiate many of these agreements, formal agreements with third countries. actually because the EU, I think, was more demanding than they did offered. You know, the EU wants to have agreements on readmission, not only from own citizens, but also from people who have crossed a certain country. They try to shift the responsibility for them also to transit countries. And they want third countries to strengthen their border controls. But I think if you really want to have equal partnerships and you want to have effective cooperation, I think the scope should be much wider. On the one hand, look at the perception and the interest of third countries themselves, and that requires, I think, an openness on discussing legal pathways and resettlement, but also, for instance, labor migration, study, etc., etc. And up until now, you see that because this is to a large extent still the competence of the member states, that the member states are very hesitant in offering something like that. So the Commission needs to demand, but cannot offer a lot. And therefore, you see that the Commission is including all other policy areas of EU foreign policy. You think of trade, development aid, even maybe human rights, financing, etc., etc. Actually, all aims with all policy areas which have their own aims. You know, you have trade relationship in order to improve development in other parts of the world. You have cooperation on good governance in order to promote good governance. You have development aid in order to also strengthen and combat poverty in countries. And I think that this, prioritizing migration, our own migration interest, is very dangerous for achieving all the other aims that the EU has, and therefore undermines also the coherency of the whole EU foreign policy. I think that's really a dangerous development, and it also does not. It's also not positive for refugees and migrants who are stuck in certain transit countries. I think, therefore, the conditionality should be very much more on, you cooperate on migration, you give support for the integration or for the hosting refugees in exchange for having some agreements that their human rights are being strengthened and that they get access to the labor market, for instance, in the countries where they are hosted. But this is not what you see, and on the contrary, there is hardly any monitoring of what does it mean for the human rights of migrants and refugees, which are stuck in certain transit countries. And Johansson, the Commission, promised earlier that she would look into better monitoring systems. We don't see it back in the new pact, for instance. There's nothing on human rights monitoring. I'm at the moment making a report for the Droit Committee with more criteria and principles, recommendations on external dimension of migration policy. And one of them is that before we conclude an agreement, we already should see what would that mean for the safeguards and the human rights. And also having a follow-up in terms of independent and transparent monitoring. You also see it with the EU-Turkey statement. There is hardly any independent monitoring system so that we really see what it does with the refugees who are staying in Turkey, but also with those who are stuck on the Greek islands, because they are also subject to this statement. And I think the statement is very exemplary for the new tendency, and that is moving from formal agreements to informal agreements. And this is very problematic because, of course, the European Parliament is sidelined with that because we even cannot give consent to it, let alone that we are involved in the content and on the impact. But also, there's no judicial protection as well. We know, of course, the refugees who are on the Greek islands went to the Court of Justice, and the Court of Justice said, no, you are the case is inadmissible because I don't have any competence. This is a matter of national governments. And it's very difficult to go to national judges in order to, to claim that you are affected by these instruments. So I think actually that this whole tendency is very much affecting the human rights safeguards. You already mentioned Libya, and there you also see that member states have shifted from being physical involved in, like, for instance, the transfer of returns to other countries, because then they might become accountable, like Italy was doing so. Italy, when Italy returned people to Libya in 2012, but they were physically present, they were physically involved. The European Court of Human Rights said, but now you're responsible, so you are pushing back, you are violating your human rights. Since then, we see a shift from not being physically involved anymore, but paying, outsourcing the border control by other countries. And this leads, of course, to big risks for human rights violations, especially if you look at Libya, where we know that if we pay the Libyan Coast Guard to intercept people and bringing them back, we know that it brings them in horrific circumstances in the detention camps in Libya. And we cannot say that we are not also responsible for this taking place if we fund this cooperation. So in that sense, I think there's a lot to do in order to scrutinize better and to make sure that human rights are being respected. Of course, there is some soft language and instruments like sponsorships being promised, etc., and also talent, trying to match talents and so on. But we have had these proposals more often, and this is all, like trying to organize something without legislation. It's maybe a good step forward in order to increase the mobility between third countries and the EU, because I think that's very important. But I think it's still a long way to go to really get equal partnerships. Therefore, we really lack the political will of member states to engage in these types of cooperations.
Yeah, again, we come back to the political will, and Strick, there are questions on the talent partnerships actually as an alternative. We can get to them in the Q&A session. I am later going to turn to Professor Kaya for reflecting on from the perspective of Turkey, potential issues with the pact in relation to returns and integration that relating to the external dimension. But first, I'd like to turn to Mr. Knaus to propose us within this framework, propose to us what should the new EU-Turkey deal entail. And we have been, as Top, doing some research on this too, and probably what we will hear from Ayhan in regards to the integration needs and areas that need improvement will relate to your response as well. Especially with regards to the formal labor market integration and the issues of sustainability and trade. But without further ado, I'll leave it up to you, and then maybe we can have some time to deliberate on that.
Well, I would like to be very, very, very realistic, because I think the situation is dramatic. And as I've said, it's dramatic in terms of the overall EU-Turkey relations, which are really, really troubling to anybody who cares about this relationship. This could easily get much worse. And it's deeply troubling about the situation of refugee law and the global refugee system in the way the richest continent in the world, the European Union, the richest union in the world, is treating asylum seekers. Now, if we don't propose things that can get majority support, the status quo will stay, and the status quo is brutal. Majority support in Greece, and this is my challenge to those who criticize the EU-Turkey statement, the only thing that could be an alternative to the status quo is a new statement with Turkey. Why? Because we have no returns to Turkey for the last 6 months, and people are still stuck on the islands because they are supposed to deter arrivals. And this is popular in Greece. the trouble is that the pushbacks that we see, yes, we don't need monitoring. Any journalist who wants to do monitoring can go and finds out the facts. We have pictures. We have people on Greek islands, and then they are back in Turkey, and they have pictures of the pushbacks on YouTube. It's not a shortage of information. There's no political will. How many infringement procedures have there been from the Commission about the reception conditions on the Greek islands? I think 0. So why would this be different in the future? Now that a majority of governments, and I know my government, Austria, very well, they say, don't take a single child. And the Greens are in the government coalition. They would like to take people, but they can't push it through. So the reality is deterrence is backed by the Austrian government. So what I'm saying is that every government in Europe now, if it wants to be able to end what we have on the Greek islands, and if it wants to be able, and this is more important for Turkey, to help the refugees in Turkey, because I agree with Tineke Strik, we have an obligation to help refugees in third countries, both by resettling and by supporting those communities in those countries financially. Now, if we want to do that, we need a new agreement. How do we get to a new agreement? Only if Turkey proposes it, just like in March 2016. What could Turkey propose? Well, here, back to the realism. Let's be very clear. A lot of EU countries are very happy with the status quo. Few people arrive. Some are not. In Germany, I'm based in Berlin, you have a lot of people who say, we would like to end these terrible scenes that we see. We would like to take children. You have cities saying this. You have MPs from all the parties, Green, Christian Democrat, Social Democrat, liberals, in the Bundestag, in the parliament, saying we should take some children. The trouble is the Greeks are actually not interested in this because they need the people on the islands for deterrence. But you have some countries that are not happy with the status quo. These countries are Turkey's partner. And what we need for Turkey is to use the last few weeks of the German presidency and approach Germany and Greece with an offer. I'm gladly sending this to Top, and you can share it with all our audience, or I can put the link in there, where we've sketched what a new EU Turkey statement could look like. It would be very realistic. It would say the EU is committing to help with another 6 billion euros for the next 6 years, in addition to what it has already promised. Why? Because Turkey has an enormous integration challenge. And anybody who's been to, if you go to Sultan Beyli, or if you go to Kilic, if you go to these municipalities or cities where there are 7, 8, 10, 15% of the resident population are refugees, and you see the projects EU money has helped fund or co-fund, this should continue. But the only chance for this to continue is if there's a new agreement. Otherwise, there will be no agreement among member states' finance ministers. So Turkey has a situation of economic crisis. The lira is falling. There is an overall COVID crisis, which affects all of Europe and all of the world. And the EU is not committing to more money for refugees in Turkey. This is not good. But the best chance Turkey has to change this is to put a proposal on the table with the one government, Germany, in the presidency that is most interested. Don't wait for the Slovenian presidency, which is sometime next year. What should be in that agreement? Turkey should say, we insist on continued support for refugees in Turkey because we have costs for healthcare, for education, social support. We also want the EU to continue to help us by resettling people. This was in the EU-Turkey statement. 30,000 people were resettled. It should be 50,000 a year. Now, will the EU then do it? Well, that will be the test. But you could offer this. And then Turkey should commit to take people back, and then it's up to the EU to make asylum procedures work. I completely disagree with Tineke Strik on the argument that people are kept on the islands because of the EU-Turkey agreement. There is no EU-Turkey agreement now, and they are kept on the islands, and the situation is getting worse. This was always the alternative to an agreement. People are stuck on the islands because, why are children on the islands in the last 5 years when Greece has always said it will not return any children? They could be moved, you recognize a child, you move them to the mainland immediately. They are on the islands to deter arrivals. What we need is quick decisions. And of course, Greece could decide quickly if 2,000 people a month arrive and there are 200 asylum caseworkers. There was a question of organization and will, not resources. If we can't decide 2,000 asylum cases, and by the way, the new pact doesn't change anything on fast procedures. Greece already has fast procedures in force since 2016, applicable to everyone. The trouble is that it didn't want to and didn't have the organization to implement them. And there, again, I fully agree with Tineke, Strick, that simply saying it should be fast won't make it fast. What we need is to organize this decently and realistically. You know, you can't, with 20,000 people on the islands, if you want to work off the backlog, you'll always have people stuck there for a year. You need a new cut-off date. You need to organize it well, but you need to make a serious offer to Turkey. You talked about partners. Well, I mean, if the EU cannot reach a partnership with the country that is its neighbor, has the biggest number of refugees in the world, and where already for 4 years it has found that it can spend money in Turkey that helps refugees. You know, it spent the money slowly, but it did spend 3 billion, and this did contribute. And you see the projects in Turkey. If we can't do it with this partner, well, who in the world do we want to work with? So, of course, this will not, realistically, will not work without a bigger package. I think we also need a solution to the military confrontation in the Eastern Mediterranean. I won't talk about this here, but in a report we are presenting very soon, we propose how Greece, Turkey, and the EU could agree on 2 things that would be the pillars of reversing the negative trend in the relationship. 1, a new statement on migration with support for refugees in Turkey, and with Turkey and Greece both committing to respect the Refugee Convention in the Aegean, as they were committed to do in 2016. And secondly, a moratorium on exploration of gas in the Eastern Mediterranean in return for European support for alternative energies in Turkey to actually substitute for discovering a new gas field, which is unlikely in the next 5 years anyways, and substitute by tying Turkey into the European Green Deal and green foreign policy that is beneficial for both sides. Now, we need win-win situations based on interest, but we need to be realistic. Let's not dream. There will be no mandatory relocation from any Western Mediterranean country in the EU ever decided, because these countries don't want it. Greece has shown it. I've talked to the Germans. They've said, the prime ministers of German states have gone to Greece, have said, we are prepared to take people, and they've been told publicly and privately by Greek officials, no, we will keep people on the islands. We don't want to distribute them throughout Europe, because we fear if we distribute them around Europe, more people will come. Distribution should be a part of the policy in Greece. It was in 2016, 2017, but this too will only work if we have an agreement with Turkey. If we have no agreement with Turkey, there'll be no distribution of refugees. There will be bad conditions on the islands. There'll be pushbacks. And it will be the end of the Refugee Convention. And it would be bad for refugees globally, terrible for Europe and legality, a horrible signal for human rights. And it would be bad for Turkey, because you don't benefit at all. You don't get EU support, and the refugees get stuck in Turkey anyways. So let's work on getting out of this trap.
Thank you, Mr. Knas. So we did, I think, disagree on quite a few things, but it's great to panel to disagree. But we also seem to agree on many, such as in terms of the obstacles against the fair and efficient migration management and cooperation, namely the political will and state capacity. Well, let's hear from Professor Kaya more about what this deal could implicate in Turkey in terms of the existing conditions of the refugees and the further areas of improvements that the cooperation should focus on. The floor is yours, Professor Kaya.
Thank you, Başak. Well, I'm not really going to get into the debate about the pros and cons of the deal, but I'll say a few words. First of all, let me just state some general remarks about the current state of the EU with respect to the refugees in general and Islam in particular. As far as I can see, the EU has been very much concentrating on its own interests. This is understandable, but when concentrating on your interests, it shouldn't be at the expense of the European values, the universal European values. Human dignity is the most important thing here. So this is the first thing. The second thing is that unfortunately, this framing the things as a crisis is really damaging, is really harming the European spirits. As far as I can see, Europe is becoming more and more culturally Christian. Let me underline, culturally Christian, not religiously Christian. This anti-Islam, anti-Muslim sentiments, Islamophobic sentiments are turning the European policymakers, the European citizens become more and more engaged in culturalist expression, culturalist depiction of the world, civilizational depiction of the world from a rather more Christian perspective. I have no problem with religions at all, on the contrary. But this is what I see, a very polarized depiction of the world on the basis of dichotomy between, let's say, on the one hand, Islam, and on the other hand, a culturally defined Christianity. This is not really the Europe, this is not really the EU that I personally want to see. This is the second thing. And of course, the third thing is about this notion of crisis. Since 2015, we only talk about the refugee crisis within the European Union. Turkey has not used the term at all for so many years, almost 10 years. The refugees in Turkey or the Syrians under temporary protection in Turkey have not been framed within the framework of crisis. On the contrary, there were different mechanisms, there were different policies, discourses to somehow make it possible for at the moment around like 4 million people under temporary protection to feel themselves in comfort at ease. So this is the third thing. But going back to the debate, although I have also my own critiques about the deal, about the statement, practically speaking, what I see since 2016, there is, of course, a very positive impact of the deal and the financial assistance of the European Union on the well-being of the refugees. More than 1.5 million refugees in Turkey are now being assisted by the ESSN program, Emergency Social Safety Net program. They are very much eager to have 120 lira per month individually, which shows that they are extremely vulnerable. We're talking about majority of the refugees in Turkey who are living under the hunger threshold. I'm not talking about the poverty threshold, but the hunger threshold. So there is something serious here. You cannot just postpone, you cannot just deny to see this practical reality. Of course, this has contributed a lot to their resilience in everyday life, because they really dependent on this small amount of money, which is around which was 30 euro per month, which is really nothing. And then the third thing that strikes my attention is that this is what we see in the field, together with the both deal as well as the introduction of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. The local governments in Turkey have become more active in integrating the refugees in Turkey. This is a good sign, because probably together with the financial assistance of the European Union, the local governments which are not able to get funds from the central authorities for the well-being of the refugees, they get some funds from the European Union for their integration. This is a good, development in the Turkish context. But of course, when you look at the EU level, this deal was basically, or partly trying to curb the right-wing nationalist and nativist and populist resurgence in the European Union. I don't know if they have succeeded with this target, because I know that the root causes of the right-wing populist, nativist, and nationalist resurgence in Europe has nothing to do, or has something very little to do with the refugees. It's rather more socioeconomic and political, roots we need to see there. The fifth point that I want to make is that this ESSN strategy has also created a kind of dependency between the refugees themselves and the little financial assistance that they get from the European Union. And the Ministry of Labor, Family and Social Security back in 2018 has prepared an exit strategy from the ESSN, which was, I think, very interesting, because deep down, this document, which is accessible in the internet, this document states that the Turkish state actors are actually in favor of integrating the refugees into the formal labor market. Because we're also discussing why not so many Syrians did not apply for work permits since January 2016. And we know if they apply, if they get the work permit, official work permit, they're gonna have to give up this financial assistance given by the ESSN, right? Or why we are wondering not so many Syrians applied for Turkish citizenship. The number was around like 100,000 at most. And the same goes with the work permit. So we are talking about a very minimal number of applications in this regard. So then the state actors back in 2018 decided to make it possible for the Syrians to apply to be integrated into the formal labor market. So in this sense, of course, together with the pandemic, all these strategies have been very much forgotten. Things have drastically changed. But this shows us that there is this very strong indication by the Turkish state to try to integrate the Syrians into the labor market, into the social, economic, and political spheres of life. But of course, you also have seen that the Turkish state actors from time to time use the deal as a leverage, as a kind of bargaining instrument, sometimes not really decent bargaining instrument between Turkey and the EU, i.e. the latest crisis too in March 2020, just before the pandemic, which created a lot of hassle, a lot of human rights violations. So Başak, if you allow me, what can be the next? I can just say a few words about what can be the next step between Turkey and the EU in terms of managing this process. I think the Turkish central states and municipal actors need to get direct investment, direct support from the European Union bodies, but not through certain, mediators in between. But this is what the Turkish state actors and the municipal actors need at the moment. Since the economic crisis is really hitting Turkey, they need some assistance in order for them to be able to assist the Syrians integrate into the social, economic, and political spheres of life. There are already many different, legal, frameworks in Turkey within the municipal law, for instance, recognizing the institution of denizenship. So according to the local municipal law in Turkey, everyone living in the boundaries of a certain municipality, irrespective of being Turkish citizen or not, are obliged to get equal services. So in terms of legal aspects, Turkey has great legal parameters to make sure that refugees or migrants under temporary protection can get very well integrated into the political, economic, and social spheres of life. And finally, especially in the border regions, in Şanlıurfa, in Hatay, Kilis, and Gaziantep, most of the migrants are working in the agricultural sector, textile sector, furniture sector, and maybe I'm not the expert on customs union, or I'm not really very much informed about the modernization of customs union, etc. But the EU should really consider to make it possible for the trading of the products produced in these fields, in which the Syrians are really taking quite a lot of numbers in terms of making production, especially agricultural products, furniture industry, and textile industry. These are the words that I want to contribute to the debate. Thank you, Başak.
Thank you, Professor Kaya, for pointing out to the sustainability dimension and employment issues, as well as bringing us the local level back, which is where the actual integration actually happens, in line with your arguments, and also what Mr. Knaus has suggested for a win-win solution. We had elsewhere, and actually for Brookings, with Kemal Kirişçi has argued that the EU could actually extend preferential trade agreements for Turkey, like Compact Jordan, especially for goods and sectors with high refugee participation, by granting concessions that would enable Turkey to expand its agricultural and semi-processed agricultural goods to the EU, tied to a formal employment of Syrians as a win-win-win solution. So when I don't want to steal from the time of the participants for this, but I would love to hear about this from our speakers when they have time to take a look at it, and I'll be happy to share it with them. So let's move to the questions with the limited time we have left, and I'll try to cover as many as I can, and there are many, and they seem to be on the issues of human rights and on the issues of cooperation, of course. And the burden sharing as well. Some of them relate to the feasibility of burden sharing, and I'll refer to a particular one. Maybe this could be I can address this to Ms. Strick regarding a question by Verda Uyar about from the Council of the European Union regarding the search and rescue, which remains, in her words, to be a policy area failing in both legal text and practice. And let's see, and also linked to illegal activities and pushbacks that are often not happening on the borders. So her question is basically, do you see any intervention by the new pact in that sense for the migrants at sea regarding migrants' mobility outside of official borders? And I would like to, so you can also feel free to reflect on the other speakers' comments. And I would like to ask you one more question from the audience, which is from a colleague, Başak Kale, with the same name. So apparently in Turkey, if you're studying refugees and if you're a woman, your name should be Başak. That was a joke in the on Twitter at some point. So do you think that the EU's new Migration and Asylum Pact pragmatic rationale for efficiency will make securitization governance more clear, departing from a normative framework that the EU usually has? I also thought was a good question. And then we can maybe move to other speakers after Ms. Strick.
Thank you very much for these questions. And indeed, I'm very interested in that idea of making sure that more access to the labor market, like in agricultural sector, will also benefit Turkey through preferential treatment. I think in Jordan, I think it works very well. There must be more incentives for a country, a transit country, to offer access to the labor market, especially in times of economic crisis, of course, because I mean, there's a lot of talk in the EU on a lack of support for hosting refugees because of the economic crisis. But if you look in Turkey, for instance, there's also this risk of resentments, of course, at the moment that people also fear for their own income. So in this way, you really could create a win-win situation, which would, trigger countries to cooperate with this. Because I really think indeed that the poverty level and also the hunger level, indeed what Ayaan said, should really be addressed. And to be honest, I was actually one of the critical voices towards the whole EU-Turkey statement. Maybe Gerald still already knows it, that I was a rapporteur for the Council of Europe for the Parliamentary Assembly, and we had a very critical report, because actually, I fear very much if, especially if you have a country which is already hosting the largest part of the refugee population, and you force them to remain responsible on their own for these refugees. It will be detrimental for the rights and the values and the human rights protection of those refugees themselves. I think it's much too fragile, and I completely agree. The EU should take responsibility by supporting refugees communities outside of the EU, but not per se under the condition that this country takes back everyone who is entering the EU. I mean, if you look at the proportions, I think it's really out of balance. The number that the EU is hosting is far too little compared to other parts of the world. And this tendency of outsourcing, externalization, you see it with the US, you see it with Australia. And in the end, it means that even the most fragile countries have to host most of the refugees. And I think, so I would very much more see conditionality in terms of human rights and strengthening the position of refugees than conditions in the sense of preventing irregular migration to the EU. And that was my criticism on the EU-Turkey agreement. So therefore, I do not completely agree with Gerald to say there's only two choices, one of deterrence and one of having a statement like this. But I understand the current political situation right now. And there also, I don't see sufficient political will to really share the responsibility in a fair way with Turkey and other parts of the world. And in that sense, I would very much favor indeed prolonging the cooperation by making sufficient money available in order to support the refugees in Turkey. I see that as the second best option. I mean, so, and of course, if we also at the same time share the responsibility through much more resettlement. Having that said, regarding your questions with search and rescue, I think in that regard, there is some positive and some negative elements of this new pact. On the one hand, there is this recommendation by the Commission that member states should cooperate more in search and rescue operations in order to ensure that there is always a capacity and the responsible member states to comply with the search and rescue obligations. But on the other hand, I would have liked to see a kind of European competence on that, and more competence for the Commission also to coordinate and enforce that this will happen. Especially now that we see that the first country criterion will stay. I'm very much afraid that Italy and Malta, for instance, if they see that there's not sufficient solidarity and that they will have most responsibility, you will again see the problem that they will shy away from going to the rescue and take the responsibility to search and rescue people. Now also, the first idea was for the Commission to, after search and rescue, after disembarkation, immediately distribute the people. I think that would have been much better, because then, there would not be an incentive for Italy not to search and rescue. But now there's still a border procedure. There's still a kind of filtering system that Italy and Malta need to comply with, and that can make them more responsible than other countries. So there is a bit of an improvement, but I'm afraid it will not be enough to ensure that people are being rescued. One other element which is also good is there is this facilitation directive that makes NGOs, humanitarian organizations, who go to the rescue vulnerable for criminal prosecution. And now in the recommendation, the Commission has made clear that humanitarian assistance cannot be sanctioned, cannot be criminalized. It's still in the legislation that it's possible for the member states, but yet again, it's another positive step. Then I'm not sure what other question you also had besides this search and rescue. The securitization. And if that would lead, yeah, actually, this was maybe also in my previous contribution, more or less, that I think at the moment that the EU is prioritizing migration in the sense that the prevention of irregular migration, this tends to securitization. And in the end, that may lead indeed to affecting our own values and human rights. I think, therefore, it's very important to really establish in our legal framework a responsibility for the EU if it comes to external cooperation, so that we cannot just prevent ourselves from taking responsibility and becoming accountable. At this moment, we are just, shifting out and pretend that we are not responsible anymore. And I think our own charter, our own values should be leading in that way. And that requires actually impact assessments, monitoring mechanism that we really see what is the impact on our values and human rights, also for people who are outside our borders.
Thank you very much, Ms. Strick, and thank you for holding on and while we're taking a bit more time than planned. And now quickly I'll turn to Mr. Knaus. And there are a few questions for you also regarding the human rights dimension. That was the point of disagreement with you and Ms. Strick. So I bet you will be responding on that anyhow. And some of these questions relate to refugees' rights to apply for asylum in the places that they want, and the issues of keeping them in Turkey. There is a question regarding the readmission agreements and whether or not they're really necessary for the EU to assist Turkey. Is that the new norm now? Is that kind of a question? And then there is a question from the Directorate for EU Affairs in Turkey, specifically about the VLD. Is there a place for conclusion of VLD in your proposed new pact? And let me see. And there was one more, hold on. And the other question is regarding whether or not the EU or the Greek government, having first considered and pursued the instrumentalization of Moria and the Aegean Islands as a deterrent with regards to arriving new refugees, I believe, and if do you think it follows from the geopolitical restriction, and if so, which actor initiated and imposed this? This is a question from Kathy Budge from University of Sussex. You can see the text of the question from the Q&A, and I'd be happy to send it to you over chat as well. So, floor is yours, Mr. Knaus.
All right. Well, first, a quick note on readmission. I mean, we have now, I think, 2 decades of experience with readmission agreements, and we know that they are basically pointless. They don't accelerate readmission. If there is a will, readmission works, or return works without them. And if there's no will, you can have as many agreements as you want. The EU has been negotiating with Morocco, I think, since 2000. So it's been a while. And Greece has had a readmission agreement with Turkey for a decade, and it never worked. I mean, the point is very simple. For Turkey or for any other country to take back people, it needs to cooperate. It needs to have an interest. Why would Turkey now take back anybody from Europe? I mean, it's a very good question. Turkey has many more refugees. Why would Turkey say we take people back from Greece? I mean, it's not under its obligation. There is no requirement to take back people. So readmission agreements are really a diversion. The real issue is what is a common interest to protect human rights. And here I don't see any disagreement between Tineke Strick and myself. We both think that human rights and the right to asylum need to be protected. I just see that at the moment, and this is not new. I wrote a whole book on this. Unfortunately, it's in German. Which borders do we need? Where if you read German, it might be useful, or I send it to Top and you translate it in Turkish. Where I look at the Australian experience. I mean, in Australia, you had a Labour Party reintroduce the policy of a Conservative government of putting everybody on islands and treating them. They were supposed to be on these islands as a deterrent. I mean, this is pretty similar to the EU, except that the European islands are in the EU, Lesbos, Samos, Chios, while these islands were outside of Australia. But the Labour Party did that after criticizing the policy because the public said we need some control, and it was the only thing they could think of. So the question is, how do we control borders and protect human rights? It's not control or no control, because majorities will always be for control. And this is what you see in the Greek parliament. You know, there's a lot of concern in Germany about conditions on the Greek islands. Lots of German journalists go there, cities are. How much concern is there at the moment in the Greek parliament? People think it's without an alternative. They think it's the only way to have control is to have these pushbacks. If that's what the majority thinks, and in Australia, the majority concluded this, so we've had a policy like this in Australia for 7 years. We need majority support for a human rights compliant policy, or the rights will be broken. And if Europe breaks consistently the Refugee Convention, when the numbers still are very small, when Turkey has more refugees, Syrian refugees in particular, than the whole EU together, and Europe breaks the Refugee Convention, what signal does it send to the world where already very few rich countries take any refugees? But now let me conclude on a positive note. I'm convinced that, and there again, I agree with Tineke Strick, that the realistic options today is the status quo or a new agreement. A third option, which I know some desire, which might be better, is not on the table. There is not a single government in the EU supporting it. Not a single party in power in the EU supporting it. But an agreement with Turkey that continues support for Turkey and that improves conditions on the Greek islands and that improves ability of processing asylum applications doesn't need the migration pact. We can do it today. But there's one thing we need to add to it, or two things, but one thing that is important. And Turkey could insist on this. There should again be an ability to resettle not just Syrians, also others who need protection from Turkey. You know, there's a group of Afghans today on the Greek islands. On Lesbos, it's the majority of the people. In the past, it was possible for Afghans in Turkey to apply for protection, and if they needed protection, to be resettled. So what I proposed here in Berlin, and what I proposed in talking to friends across the Atlantic, in the team of Joe Biden and in Canada, is that next year we have the 70th anniversary of the Refugee Convention. And we need a conference of a few countries that are leaders on refugees today, practically, not just rhetorically. You know, Canada takes through resettlement 30,000 people a year, 20,000 of which through private sponsorship. This is a model. Germany and Canada together. Germany is the country that has given most protection after an asylum procedure, with the biggest asylum agency in the world in Germany. The United States under Joe Biden has promised to take 120,000 refugees through resettlement each year. And I know that his team was working on this already while he was a candidate. If Turkey joins this group and says, we are the country with most refugees in the world, and we have an interest in preserving the Refugee Convention, and here are our concerns. You should also take people from Turkey. You should continue to support us in the biggest integration project in Turkish history. 5% of Turkish population are refugees. This is a huge challenge. Support us financially and with cooperation. Don't forget the IDPs across the border in Syria, in Idlib. I mean, 1 million people in desperate situation. Here is what Turkey proposes. But the starting point, and I close on this, please put a proposal on the table and push for it realistically. as there is still a German presidency that would respond to it on getting a new agreement with the EU. Because right now, all these ideas are great to help Turkey and refugees with exporting things and customs. Right now, the debate in Europe is about sanctions, right? We have an EU process of negotiations which is not moving anywhere. We have Turkey getting into trouble in the Council of Europe because of some people in prison for far too long, and this will be raised with the Committee of Ministers. We have tensions militarily at sea. We have the French government, thinking about abolishing the customs union. I mean, this is dramatic. We need to reverse the dynamic. We need a win-win situation on all these issues, but the easiest starting point is to get a new agreement in Turkey's interest on cooperation on migration that works for Greece, that works for human rights, and that works for Germany and other countries in the EU, including the Benelux countries that still care about the Refugee Convention. It's not everyone. And don't wait for the Migration Pact. It will change nothing in the Aegean if it's adopted or if it's not adopted. And my last point on this, it will not be adopted because Italy and Spain are not going to be silly and accept centers to keep people there for months without any realistic idea what will happen to those people. And the realistic idea in the pact supposedly is return, but there is no idea practically how to make return of those who are rejected possible. So at this moment, with the lowest number of returns from Europe in decades, because of Corona, and it will be like this in the next year too, there'll be very few returns. At this moment, Greece and Spain and Malta will not accept the prospect of new centers like Moria on their border. So if they don't accept it, it's not Hungary and Poland. If they don't accept it, there'll be no agreement. So yes, we need a better policy. I agree with the goals of the Migration Pact. You know, we need quick asylum, we need return, we need more resettlement, but it's too vague. But first, we need a solution in the Aegean, in the EU's and in Turkey's interest. And I apologize, I have to run because I need to go to the dentist by bike, and it's about an hour away. And in Berlin, I'm not taking public transport at the moment. But it was a great debate.
Thank you, Mr. Knaus. I'm pretty sure that your messages were very clear and went through, and regarding a new proposal and for his last comments and responses to the questions, I now turn to Professor Kaya. And thank you very much, Mr. Knaus, for joining us today. As we say our goodbyes to you. To expedite the process a bit, I sent the questions to Mr. Kaya by chat. So some of them relate to the integration policy of Turkey, whether or not there is one. The other one is regarding the case of Greece announcing that it is considering changing its asylum law and what would be the implications of that on Turkey. And last is related to the I believe the meeting in Syria and Turkey's participation or lack of participation to this meeting, and your reflections on that. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Başak. Just very briefly, let me just say a few words for the ordinary, decent European citizens who still have a very strong hunch that hundreds, thousands of Syrians, refugees in Turkey, are sitting on their suitcases for the next to catch the next boat, which is not the case at all. You know, let's first be clear about this. I can very well speak for the Syrians as we are conducting a lot of different field research in different parts of the country of Turkey. I can't speak on behalf of the Afghanis or Pakistanis or Iraqis or different Senegalese or different people coming from different parts of Africa. But certainly, majority of the refugees in Turkey are Syrian. And an overwhelming majority of the Syrians are willing to stay here simply because of the fact that there is a very strong cultural intimacy, religious intimacy between the Syrians and the Turks in general. This is still a viable discourse used by the Syrians in order to feel themselves comfortable in this country. And also, they are also active individuals who are very well informed about what is going on in the European countries in terms of white, supremacists, populists, nativists, extremists, all these things happening, Islamophobia happening in many European countries as well. So let's, make the minds of the European citizens clear on that. There is not such a, emerging threat of the Syrians willing to go immediately to Greece, to Europe, etc. If that was the case, they would go then in March 2020, when the borders were somehow opened by the Turkish authorities. On the contrary, they are here to stay, majority of them. And of course, we also know that similar to the growing discourse in the European countries, as well as in Greece, like the other question dictates, there is a growing discourse on return, right? We need to work hard to make sure that the refugees will return to their homelands. Of course, there has always been different schemes of return by different European countries, including Turkey as well. But where to return? Return to a safe land, return to a safe homeland. IOM has very rigid principles of voluntary return. At the moment, there is no such a return possibility for the Syrians, simply because of the fact that the regime is still there and they don't want to go back to Syria, where the regime is still run by Assad, which takes us to the other question raised by one of our friends, Omar Katköy, and Turkey is not invited to the meeting held by the Russians in Damascus for the resolution of the crisis or the civil war in Syria and the resolution of the refugee crisis, simply because of the continuous fight between the regime and the Turkish, the Syrian regime and the Turkish authority. And the final thing that I want to underline, yes, we have been very much engaged in the preparation of the Turkish state's integration strategy document. We have been involved in the preparation of this document, and this document was not really released for quite some time by the Ministry of Interior to the public, simply because the government is aware of the fact that using the discourse of integration in public will negatively cost, in electoral terms. Instead of underlining the integration discourse, the government has unfortunately, together with the oppositional parties in Turkey, has underlined the return discourse, which is still there. But on the other hand, we all know that the bureaucracy, the central state bureaucracy, and the local governments in Turkey, together with all the NGOs, all the civil society organization, academics, etc., paying tribute, paying attention to the former experiences of this country, like 100 years ago, trying to incorporate all the migrants, all the refugees to the political, social, and economic system. All these actors are working very hard and very well prepared for taking actions to make sure that the Syrians under temporary protection will have a better fit into different spheres of life in this country. And the integration strategy document has also been lately released by the Turkish government to the public, indicating which actors, which state actors, which municipal actors will have to react in order to make sure that the refugees under temporary protection will be integrated. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ayhan Hocam. And on this note, I'd like to thank all of our panelists for this thought-provoking conversation. We started punctually the German way, but we are finishing late the Turkish way. And I would like to also thank our participants who stuck to us and continued engaged in with their questions. In a nutshell, we evaluated the new Pact on Migration, EU Pact on Migration and Asylum, by focusing on the external dimension and potential collaborations with Turkey. We touched upon several issues of human rights cooperation, the obstacles to this cooperation in regards to political will, state capacity, and we tried to draw some conclusions and give some direction to policymakers and academics on several issues to focus on, and some ideas for new proposals. I hope it was beneficial for all the participants, and it has clearly shown the importance of joint research and policy advocacy in order to achieve these possible win-win-win solutions, and we're happy to have contributed to this process. I would like to thank the two institutions that made this event possible one more time, the TOBB and the EU-Turkey Forum, and I'd like to finish by thanking our two wonderful translators about whom we heard great reviews so far. Thank you very much for your great work. At this note, I'm happy to finish the webinar, and thank you very much again for your participation, for thought-provoking debate, and I will be sharing the remaining questions that we could not address, and would appreciate if you could take a look at them and provide some answers too. Thank you very much.
Thank you to the moderator as well. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Ciao.